Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. In the world of Eldora, where magic flowed through the very veins of the land, there was a time when every corner of the world glowed with the vibrant energy of the Eye of the Void. This crystal, ancient and powerful, resided in the heart of the Arcane Academy, the oldest and most revered institution of magic in Eldora. The Eye's light was more than just a symbol of power, it was the lifeblood of the world itself, a conduit through which all magic was born and sustained. But now, that light was fading. Fiona stood in the grand hall of the Arcane Academy, her eyes locked on the dimming crystal. She had always been drawn to it, ever since she was a little girl. The other apprentices would often tease her for her fascination with the Eye, but Fiona never minded. There was something about the crystal that resonated with her, a connection she couldn't quite explain. The hall was silent, the air thick with a sense of unease. The scholars, clad in their robes of deep blue and gold, whispered among themselves, their faces creased with worry. At the center of the room stood Archmage the Lion, his presence commanding respect from all who were gathered. He was tall and lean, his silver hair flowing like a waterfall down his back. His eyes, sharp and piercing, scanned the room before settling on Fiona. "It is as we feared," the lion said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of wisdom. "The Eye of the Void is losing its light. If we do not find a way to restore it, all magic in Eldora will be lost." A murmur of concern rippled through the room. The thought of a world without magic was unthinkable. Magic was not just a tool, it was woven into the fabric of life itself. Without it, the world would crumble into chaos. "What can we do, Archmage?" one of the scholars asked, his voice trembling with fear. The lion sighed, his gaze shifting back to the dimming crystal. "The Eye of the Void is a mystery even to us. Its power is beyond our understanding, but there are ancient texts that speak of a force that could reignite it. A force that lies in the deepest corners of the world, forgotten by time." Fiona felt a surge of determination rise within her. She had always felt a deep connection to the Eye, and now that connection felt stronger than ever. Before she could second-guess herself, she stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. "I will go," she said, her words ringing through the hall. All eyes turned to her, a mixture of surprise and skepticism. Fiona was young, just an apprentice, and her impulsiveness was well known among the scholars. But there was something in her voice, a conviction that silenced the whispers. "Fiona," the lion said, his tone gentle but firm, "this journey is not to be taken lightly. The world beyond these walls is filled with dangers unknown, and the path to restoring the Eye is fraught with peril." "I understand," Fiona replied, her green eyes meeting Thalian's. "But I believe I am meant to do this. The Eye of the Void has always called to me, and I cannot ignore that call now." The lion studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. You will embark on this journey, Fiona. But you must be prepared for what lies ahead. The force you seek is not just an external power, it is something that resides within you." Fiona didn't fully understand what the lion meant, but she nodded nonetheless. There was no turning back now. The next morning, Fiona set out from the Arcane Academy, the sun just beginning to rise over the horizon. She carried with her only the essentials, a small satchel filled with provisions, a map of Eldora, and a staff imbued with basic protective spells. As she walked through the gates of the academy, she felt a pang of uncertainty. The world outside was vast and unfamiliar, filled with dangers she had only read about in books, but she pushed the fear aside and focused on her mission. The fate of Eldora rested on her shoulders, and she couldn't afford to be afraid. Her journey took her through the enchanted forests of Eloria, where the trees whispered secrets of the ancient world. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and the forest floor was soft beneath her feet. As she walked, she felt the presence of the forest's magic, a subtle energy that seemed to guide her steps, but as the days passed, Fiona began to feel the weight of her journey. The forest, once comforting, began to feel oppressive, as if the very trees were watching her every move. At night, she was plagued by strange dreams, visions of shadowy figures and distant voices, calling her name. In one such dream, Fiona found herself standing in a vast, empty field. The sky was a deep, unnatural shade of purple, and the ground beneath her feet was cracked and barren. In the distance, she could see a figure, shrouded in darkness, standing still as a statue. "Who are you?" Fiona called out, but the figure did not respond. Instead, it began to move toward her, its form shifting and twisting like smoke. As the figure approached, Fiona felt a cold dread settle in her chest. She tried to run, but her feet were rooted to the ground. The figure reached out to her, its hand brushing against her cheek, and Fiona gasped as a surge of fear and longing washed over her. "You cannot escape," the figure whispered, its voice echoing in her mind. "The darkness within you will consume you." Fiona awoke with a start, her heart pounding in her chest. She was drenched in sweat, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The dream had felt so real, so visceral, and the fear it left behind clung to her like a shadow. She tried to shake off the unease, telling herself it was just a dream, nothing more. But as the days went on, the dreams grew more frequent, and the fear they instilled began to seep into her waking hours. Despite the growing darkness within her, Fiona pressed on, determined to reach her destination. She traveled through treacherous mountains, where the wind howled like a beast, and the cold bit at her skin. She crossed vast deserts, where the sun scorched the earth, and the air shimmered with heat, but no matter how far she traveled, the dreams followed her, growing more intense with each passing night. And with each dream, she felt her magic weakening, as if the very essence of her being was being drained away. It was during one of these restless nights that Fiona found herself in a secluded valley, hidden away from the rest of the world. The air was still and quiet, the only sound the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. In the center of the valley stood a small, weathered hut, its walls covered in moss and ivy. Fiona approached the hut cautiously, her hand gripping her staff tightly. As she neared the entrance, the door creaked open, revealing a figure standing in the doorway. The figure was an old man, his face lined with age and wisdom. His eyes, a piercing blue, seemed to see right through her, as if he could read her very soul. "Welcome, child," the old man said, his voice soft and soothing. "I have been expecting you." Fiona frowned, unsure of how to respond. "Who are you?" The old man smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. "I am but a humble hermit, one who has lived in this valley for many years. But I was once like you, a student of the arcane, seeking to understand the mysteries of the world." Fiona's curiosity was piqued. "You were a mage?" The old man nodded. "Yes, long ago. I studied at the Arcane Academy, just as you do now. But my thirst for knowledge led me down a dark path, one that ultimately brought me here." Fiona hesitated, unsure of what to make of the hermit's words. But something about him felt familiar, as if they were connected in some way. "I am on a journey," Fiona said, her voice steady. "To find the power that can reignite the eye of the void." The hermit's expression grew serious. "Ah, the eye of the void. A powerful crystal, indeed. But its power is not as simple as you might think." "What do you mean?" Fiona asked, her heart quickening. "The eye of the void is not just a source of magic," the hermit explained. It is a reflection of the world, and of those who draw upon its power. When the world is in harmony, the eye shines bright. But when darkness takes hold, the eye begins to fade. Fiona frowned. So the reason the eye is dimming is because of the darkness in the world? The hermit nodded. Yes. And not just the world, but within you as well. Fiona's breath caught in her throat. Within me? The hermit's gaze softened. You carry a great burden, child. A burden of fear, of longing, of pain. These emotions, if left unchecked, can consume you, just as they consumed me. And they are what is causing the eye to dim. Fiona felt a surge of panic rise within her. But I don't understand. How can my emotions affect the eye? Because you are connected to it, the hermit said. The eye of the void is not just a crystal, it is a conduit for the energy of the world. And you, Fiona, are more attuned to it than anyone else. Fiona's mind raced as she tried to process the hermit's words. Could it be true? Could the darkness she felt within herself be the cause of the eye's dimming? What can I do? She asked, her voice trembling. The hermit stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. You must confront your fears, your desires. You must embrace them, accept them as part of who you are. Only then will you be able to reignite the eye. Fiona felt a wave of fear wash over her. The thought of facing her deepest fears was terrifying, but she knew there was no other way. I don't know if I can, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The hermit placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. You are stronger than you think, Fiona. The power to reignite the eye lies within you, but you must be willing to face the darkness within yourself. Fiona nodded, though her heart was still heavy with doubt. She had come so far, but the real challenge was just beginning. Fiona spent several days in the valley, preparing herself for the trials ahead. The hermit guided her, teaching her how to meditate and connect with her inner self. It was a difficult process, one that forced Fiona to confront the emotions she had long buried deep within her. As she delved into her memories, she uncovered the source of her fears. She remembered a time when she was just a child, living in a small village on the outskirts of Eldora. Her family had been poor, struggling to make ends meet. But despite their hardships, they were happy. That happiness was shattered one fateful night when the village was attacked by a band of rogue mages. Fiona's parents had tried to protect her, but they were no match for the mages' dark magic. Fiona could still remember the screams, the smell of burning wood, and the sight of her parents' lifeless bodies. She had been found by a group of travelers the next morning, huddled in the ruins of her home, too traumatized to speak. It was only later, when she was brought to the Arcane Academy, that she began to heal. But the pain of that night had never truly left her. It had festered within her, a wound that refused to heal. Now, as she confronted those memories, she felt the old wounds reopening, the pain and fear flooding back. But this time, she didn't push it away. She let herself feel it, let herself grieve for the family she had lost. It was during one of these meditations that Fiona had a vision. She found herself standing in the same barren field from her earlier dreams, but this time, the figure in the distance was clear. It was her younger self, the little girl who had survived that terrible night. The younger Fiona looked up at her, her eyes filled with tears. "Why did you leave me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I didn't leave you," Fiona said, her own voice choked with emotion. "I tried to forget, but I never left you." The younger Fiona shook her head. "You abandoned me. You pushed me away because you were afraid." Fiona felt a tear slip down her cheek. I'm sorry. I was scared. I didn't know how to face what happened. The younger Fiona stepped closer, her hand reaching out to touch Fiona's. You don't have to be afraid anymore. We can face it together. Fiona looked down at the small hand in hers, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was the warmth of acceptance, of understanding. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly feel the pain, to acknowledge the fear and the grief. As she did, the barren field around her began to change. The ground softened, and grass began to sprout at her feet. The sky brightened, and the oppressive darkness lifted. The younger Fiona smiled up at her, and the two of them stood together, united. When Fiona opened her eyes, she was back in the valley, the hermit watching her with a gentle smile. You did well, child, he said. You faced your fears and found the strength within yourself. Fiona nodded, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. She had faced it, embraced it, and in doing so, she had found a new strength. The time has come, the hermit said, his voice solemn. You are ready to reignite the eye of the void. Fiona took a deep breath, her resolve firm. She had come this far, and she was ready to finish what she had started. Fiona returned to the Arcane Academy, her heart steady with purpose. The journey had changed her, and she felt a new sense of clarity as she approached the grand hall where the Eye of the Void resided. The scholars were waiting for her, their faces a mix of hope and uncertainty. Archmage the Lion stood at the center, his eyes filled with pride as he watched Fiona enter the hall. Welcome back, Fiona, the lion said, his voice warm. I see you have found what you were seeking. Fiona nodded. I have. The power to reignite the Eye of the Void lies within me, within all of us. It is our connection to the world, to ourselves, that gives the eye its light. The lion smiled, his expression one of understanding. Then let us proceed. The eye is ready. Fiona stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the dimming crystal. She could feel its energy, weak but still present, like a flickering flame on the verge of being extinguished. Closing her eyes, Fiona reached deep within herself, drawing upon the strength she had found in the valley. She felt the fear and desire within her, the emotions that had once threatened to consume her. But now, they were no longer a source of weakness. They were a part of her, a part of the world. She extended her hand toward the eye, and a soft light began to glow from within her. It was a light that resonated with the crystal, a light that grew stronger as Fiona embraced her true self. The Eye of the Void responded, its own light beginning to pulse in time with Fiona's. The dim glow grew brighter, the flickering steadied, until the crystal was once again filled with a vibrant, powerful light. The scholars watched in awe as the Eye of the Void reignited, its light shining brighter than ever before. The hall was bathed in its warm glow, and the air hummed with the energy of restored magic. Fiona opened her eyes, her heart filled with a sense of fulfillment. The Eye of the Void was whole again, its power restored. But more than that, Fiona had found herself. The scholars erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the hall. Fiona turned to see the lion smiling at her, his eyes shining with pride. You have done it, Fiona, he said, his voice filled with emotion. You have saved Eldora. Fiona smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had been worth it. She had faced her fears, embraced her desires, and in doing so, she had found the strength to reignite the Eye of the Void. As the celebration continued around her, Fiona took a moment to reflect on all that had happened. She knew that her journey was far from over, that there were still challenges ahead. But now, she was ready to face them. She walked toward the Eye of the Void, the crystal's light reflecting in her eyes. It was a symbol of the power within her, the power within all of them. A power that came not from the absence of fear, but from the courage to face it. And as she stood before the eye, Fiona knew that she was no longer just an apprentice. She was a mage, a protector of Eldora, and she was ready for whatever the future might bring.